Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today, we're tearing down one of the foundational, yet often invisible assumptions that ruled business for nearly a century. The idea that a human being at work is essentially just a component in a machine. You put money in, you press the right button, and out pops predictable output. But what happens when that human component begins to resist, demanding fulfillment, autonomy, and, a voice?
That moment of resistance, that's everything. That's the great shift from viewing the workforce as merely mechanical inputs to recognizing them as complex, motivated human assets. And that's the focus of our deep dive today. We are talking about Rensis Likert, the organizational psychologist who really led that charge.
Right.
He was pivotal in moving management theory out of the strict early industrial age and into what became known as the human relations school.
And crucially, Likert didn't just stand up and declare, be nicer to your employees. He provided the receipts. I mean, he spent decades gathering hard data to scientifically prove that the human-centric approach wasn't just, ethical. It was objectively more profitable and sustainable.
Exactly. He emerged directly as a counter-movement to what had dominated business thinking since the late 19th century. Scientific management, often just called Taylorism.
Taylorism, the stopwatch and the clipboard.
Right. Taylorism was all about maximizing mechanical efficiency, timing every single task to the second, and treating the worker as interchangeable, a cog in the machine that could be replaced instantly if it broke.
And Likert's whole thesis was the opposite. He asserted that organizational effectiveness doesn't stem from mechanical optimization alone. It relies fundamentally on the quality of human relationships and, to use his term, interpersonal competence.
Interpersonal competence. It was the ability of people to build trust and successfully work together, not just parallel to each other.
Which is a huge difference.
A huge difference. And his work really became the bedrock of the behavioral approach in management. I mean, if you were managing an organization post-World War II, you were essentially forced to grapple with Likert's findings because he didn't just offer philosophy. He offered measurement tools.
And speaking of measurement tools, he gave us two that are truly monumental, even if, his name has faded a little from public consciousness.
Well, the first, which is really the operational heart of his management philosophy, is the structure for classifying and measuring entire organizations, the management systems 1 through 4.
Okay.
This continuum measures management style based on trust, communication, and decision-making authority.
And the second is something every single person listening has interacted with, probably this week.
Oh, absolutely. The ubiquitous Likert scale.
The strongly agree to strongly disagree.
That simple 5-point scale. It was designed to measure attitudes and opinions scientifically. And the impact of that simple methodology alone just revolutionized survey research, moving these sort of qualitative assessments into the quantitative realm.
It's everywhere, and we have to establish the immense authority behind these ideas. Likert wasn't just a theorist writing in a library.
Not at all. He was an institutional builder. He founded the renowned Institute for Social Research, the ISR, at the University of Michigan. And this wasn't, a handful of graduate students. This was a dedicated, large-scale scientific operation built specifically to study human behavior in organizational settings across all kinds of industries.
So it sounds like he wasn't reacting to some theoretical problem. He was reacting to a crisis in administrative theory, recognizing that the old models were just failing.
They were.
What were the tangible, real-world drivers that forced this shift? Why did America suddenly need a human relations school?
That's the critical piece, because his work was not academic idealism.
Right.
It was driven by cold, hard business reality. His theories were based on an astounding 25 years of continuous multi-industry research, a project that cost an astronomical $15 million at the time.
$15 million?
Back then. To put that in perspective, that was a massive commitment of resources decades ago, which just confirms that businesses were deeply, deeply desperate for a new way to operate.
That kind of budget confirms the goal was scientific. It was to construct a generalized, testable theory of organization management, moving away from, intuition or just this is how we've always done it.
Exactly.
So what specific pressures did Likert identify as forcing organizations to abandon that old mechanistic view?
He identified 3 major interconnected pressures that were just eroding the effectiveness of strict, hierarchical, task-focused management. The first was increased global competition.
Okay.
After the post-war industrial boom, efficiency was no longer a uniquely American advantage. If your competitors in Japan or Germany could also optimize manufacturing and supply chains, what became your competitive edge?
It had to be something else.
It had to be. Likert argued that the edge moved from mechanical optimization to human innovation, commitment, and quality.
Right. If you're playing on a level field mechanically, the only place to gain ground is through smarter, more dedicated people.
Precisely. The second driver was a significant shift in the workforce itself,
Mm.
the rise of a more educated workforce. The post-war era saw greater educational attainment, and these workers actively resisted the strict, demeaning supervision common in older factories. They had higher expectations for dignity, for autonomy, for intellectual engagement. Likert noted that close supervision became actively counterproductive because the employees resented the lack of trust inherent in being micromanaged.
That's a fascinating point. Micromanagement isn't just about inefficiency. It's perceived as a moral offense by a highly skilled or educated worker.
It is, and that ties right into the third and perhaps most progressive, pressure for the time. The growing necessity for mental health and personality fulfillment at work.
So not just keeping them from quitting, but actually caring about their well-being.
Yes. Organizations were slowly realizing that ignoring the human cost of purely mechanical labor, the dehumanization, was crippling them through high absenteeism, massive turnover, and low-quality output driven by resentment. So Likert's mission, therefore, was to prove scientifically that addressing psychological fulfillment was not a cost center, but an investment that yielded superior long-term business results.
So his mission was clear. Use social science to construct a viable, profitable alternative to Taylorism. And the first step in constructing that alternative was, I guess, understanding what successful managers are actually doing differently.
Right.
Let's dive into Section 2 and the contrast between high and low-performing supervisory styles.
Likert's research here was meticulous. He didn't just survey people. He compared entire departments, sometimes even entire plants, consistently ranking managers by their long-term production metrics, quality control, and employee satisfaction rates.
Right.
The core research question was simple. What behaviors consistently separated the high-producing managers from the low-producing ones?
And he found two profoundly different approaches. Let's start with the style that correlated with low performance, the style he was trying to replace, the job-centered supervisors.
These managers are entirely focused on the mechanics of the task. Their world revolves around production standards, rigid timelines, and minimizing deviations from the plan.
All about the what, not the who.
All about the what. Their method of control is rooted in heavy pressure and what Likert termed close supervision.
Close supervision.
Think of this as extreme micromanagement, where the boss is constantly hovering, correcting, and timing.
And what does that say about their underlying trust in their team?
It indicates zero trust. They rely heavily on formal authority and punitive measures. When mistakes occur, the focus is not on learning or fixing the system. It's on punishing the person responsible.
Blame.
Pure blame. They see subordinates as inherently lazy or incompetent, requiring constant external pressure to perform. This creates a brittle, fear-driven environment.
Okay, so contrast that then with the employee-centered supervisors, the managers who consistently ran high-performing teams across all these different industries.
The contrast is it's structural. These managers focus first and foremost on the human aspect of work, on building a cohesive, well-trained, and supported team. They understand that their job isn't to be the ultimate taskmaster, it's to facilitate the success of the people doing the work.
How does their supervision style reflect that trust? I mean, what does that look like in practice?
Well, they utilize general supervision rather than close supervision.
General supervision.
This means granting genuine freedom, autonomy, and the necessary resources for subordinates to execute their tasks. They trust their teams to manage the details. And when mistakes happen, and they inevitably do, the employee-centered manager helps the subordinate fix the mistake constructively and learns from it, fostering a growth mindset rather than instilling fear of punishment.
It sounds like the job-centered manager is a traffic cop, and the employee-centered manager is a coach.
That's a great way to put it.
But here's the challenge, right? The traffic cop approach often appears to work in the short term. If I scream at people, they usually jump.
Yes.
And this leads directly to Likert's most crucial and frankly counterintuitive discovery, the time lag.
This is arguably the most vital concept in all of Likert's research because it explains why so many organizational reforms fail. He observed what he called the crash cycle.
Walk us through that crash cycle, because this is where the short-term view of management gets completely deceived.
Okay, so imagine an organization that has become complacent. The new CEO puts a famously tough, job-centered manager in charge. What happens in the first 3 to 6 months?
Production goes up.
Production often spikes dramatically. The manager, using fear, pressure, and tight deadlines, squeezes the organization, often cutting corners on quality or maintenance to achieve output. The traditional metrics production numbers look fantastic initially.
The board cheers, and the manager is seen as a hero, a turnaround artist.
Exactly. But Likert discovered this production boost is inherently unstable and brief. It's followed by a guaranteed crash.
Guaranteed.
Guaranteed. Because while the manager was boosting output, they were simultaneously destroying what he called the intervening variables: morale, trust, loyalty, and relationships. After that initial spike, resentment kicks in, turnover skyrockets, quality collapses due to the corner cutting, and internal cooperation just vanishes. The organization, having depleted its human energy, crashes harder than where it started.
So if a manager is reviewed quarterly and they get that short-term spike, they get rewarded before the crash cycle even fully manifests.
That's the problem.
How does a System 4 or employee-centered manager survive that quarterly review cycle when their approach requires so much patience?
That is the structural philosophical tension that still plagues management today. The durable growth cycle, which is the hallmark of the employee-centered approach, it requires patience. Likert estimated that to truly build a high-performing team based on mutual trust, shared goals, and autonomy, you need a significant investment of time. He cited findings showing it takes around 2 years.
2 years before the high, stable performance metrics fully materialize. That's an eternity in modern business.
It is, but the results, once they're established, are robust and durable. Because the pressure for high performance is now internalized. It's coming from the team's commitment to its goals and to each other. It is sustained, even when the manager isn't physically present.
The team takes ownership.
The team takes ownership. The manager who understands the time lag must educate their superiors. We're investing in assets right now, and the payoff won't be immediate, but it will last.
So the time lag is the scientific justification for prioritizing internal health over short-term output maximization. That's a crucial takeaway.
It really is. It shows that what looks like efficiency, like that close supervision, is actually organizational self-destruction over the long haul.
All right, let's move beyond supervisory style and into the structural foundation that Likert proposed for his ideal organization. And this starts with his philosophical pillar, the principle of supportive relationships.
This is the organizational ideal, and it's deceptively simple but profoundly demanding. Likert defined it as structuring every single interaction, every meeting, every performance review, every casual discussion to ensure the individual feels they have personal worth and importance.
Personal worth and importance.
It's not just about compensation. It's about respect and dignity being woven into the very DNA of the workplace.
It sounds like a constant active vigilance against dehumanizing bureaucracy. What's the practical, measurable payoff for adhering to this demanding principle?
The payoff is what he called the interaction influence system, and it's the engine of a healthy System 4 organization. When the supportive relationship principle is consistently applied, 4 key outcomes emerge. First, personal goals naturally align with organizational goals. If people feel valued, they channel their energy toward the organization's mission, which leads to genuine self-direction instead of forced compliance.
You stop having to micromanage them because they've essentially internalized the company's mission.
Exactly. Second, the pressure for high performance becomes internal. The drive comes from the employee or the peer group, not from an authoritarian boss breathing down their neck. And this internal pressure is infinitely more sustainable and powerful than external coercion. Third, communication becomes authentic and flows freely in all directions, upwards, downwards, and horizontally. People feel safe to report bad news and offer genuine critique without fearing reprisal.
Which is vital for early problem detection.
Vital. And finally, influence shifts from being based purely on hierarchy to being based on merit. Those with the best ideas and demonstrated contribution, regardless of their formal rank, are the ones who genuinely influence decisions. This taps into the full intellectual potential of the organization, not just the top layer.
That system fundamentally undermines the traditional pyramid, where influence and information only flow based on title. And speaking of the traditional structure, Likert was very critical of the standard one-to-one superior-subordinate model. Why did he see that as such a structural weakness?
Because that model inherently creates silos and isolation. When a manager's relationship is strictly one-to-one with their subordinates, those subordinates have no organic connection to the rest of the organization, particularly horizontally or upward.
Right.
It fosters competition for the manager's attention, it prevents genuine cross-functional teamwork, and it makes holistic problem-solving virtually impossible. problems become localized to departments, even if the root cause spans the entire company.
So he saw the traditional organizational chart, the peer pyramid, as a communication bottleneck and a conflict generator,
Yes.
which led him to propose his famous structural solution, the linking pin model.
The linking pin model is his attempt to inject systemic coordination into the organization. Likert recognized that the major structural flaw was that information and influence just stopped at the vertical walls of the department. So the solution, mandate overlaps.
How does this model achieve that overlap in practice?
It defines the organization not as a stack of boxes, but as a series of interlocking, overlapping groups, or triangles, as you see in his original diagrams. The key is that individuals are intentionally members of two groups simultaneously.
Okay, can we illustrate the linking pins dual role with a concrete example? It seems a little abstract.
Absolutely. Let's consider Sarah, the manager of the technical writing group. In the traditional structure, she leads that group. That's it. In the linking pin model, Sarah has a critical twin role. She is the definitive leader of her lower-level technical writing team, so she's responsible for mentoring, performance, and output.
Okay, that's the standard manager part.
Right. But simultaneously, she is a full active member of the next higher-level group. Let's call it the Product Documentation Committee, which includes the directors of engineering, marketing, and training.
Ah, so she brings the concerns, knowledge, and perspectives of her technical writing team up to the documentation committee, and she takes the strategic goals and constraints down to her writing team.
Precisely. She's the pin connecting those two circles. The value of this dual membership is that information, strategy, and influence are guaranteed to flow upwards, downwards, and critically, horizontally, between the other directors she sits with.
It ensures that the technical rating team is aware of marketing's needs, and marketing is aware of the capacity constraints of technical writing.
You got it.
This sounds immensely demanding on that manager, though. They have to wear two hats, one as an authority figure and one as a pure participant. How did Likert address the potential conflict of interest inherent in that dual role?
Well, that tension is exactly the mechanism of the linking pin. The pin individual must master interpersonal competence, the ability to transition roles seamlessly. When Sarah is with her writing team, she leads and motivates. When she is with the senior committee, she must function as a true peer, representing her team's interests and contributing expertise, not just waiting for orders.
So if she fails in that peer role, if she only relays downward directives, the system breaks down.
It completely breaks down. She becomes a bottleneck, not a pin.
That's a powerful structural fix to the silo problem. But you mentioned a critique that the model didn't go deep enough. What was that counterargument?
Well, the main critique acknowledged the benefit of the enforced communication, but questioned the fundamental redistribution of power. Critics argued that the linking pin model was simply drawing triangles around the old hierarchy. If the top group still retains ultimate authoritative decision-making power, if the linking pin member can be overruled without true participation, then the structure is merely a consultative veneer over the same old centralized authority. The power dynamic, they argued, needed to change more fundamentally than just the meeting structure.
That brings us perfectly to the mechanism Likert developed to measure that fundamental power dynamic. The management systems continuum, which classifies the health of the organization based on where its authority truly lies.
This continuum, systems 1 through 4, is the operational measuring stick that allows an organization to diagnose its health and plot its course for change. We move now from philosophy and structure to actual measurement.
Let's start at the very bottom, the polar opposite of Likert's ideal. System 1, the exploitative authoritative model.
System 1 is pure, centralized command and control. Decisions are made exclusively at the top, and management holds zero trust in subordinates. Employees are essentially seen as disposable economic inputs.
And motivation.
Motivation is driven entirely by base elements: fear, threats, and explicit punitive punishment for failure. Communication is strictly one way downward in the form of orders and directives. Teamwork is non-existent. Every employee operates in isolation. This is the model that generates the quickest crash cycle.
Okay, so moving slightly up the scale, an organization recognizes that pure fear is unsustainable and moves to System 2, benevolent authoritative.
System 2 is still fundamentally authoritarian, a master-servant relationship where the boss knows best, but the harshness is significantly mitigated. The critical difference here is the shift in motivation. Management starts supplementing fear with explicit rewards. Small bonuses, gestures of appreciation, perhaps better working conditions.
So instead of ruling by terror, they rule by conditional kindness.
Exactly. But it's still conditional. And while upward communication exists, it's heavily restricted and filtered. Employees learn quickly only to share what the boss wants to hear.
Right.
They censor bad news and negative feedback to preserve their access to those rewards. The manager hears a distorted, overly positive view of reality.
This seems like a description of many large, moderately managed companies today where the culture is decent but not truly engaging.
It is the most common transition point.
Yeah.
Then we hit the halfway mark, which Likert called System 3, consultative. This is where the structural change starts to become real.
Okay.
In System 3, management starts showing moderate, though not total, confidence and trust in employees. They begin to actively consult employees before making decisions. They solicit opinions, maybe run surveys.
But the power dynamic remains fundamentally centralized, right? Consultation is not participation.
That is the essential distinction.
Yeah.
Management retains the final authoritative say. They listen, but they decide. Some limited teamwork starts to exist, and employees are willing to share good ideas, but the upward flow of information remains cautious. Employees are still careful. They are highly motivated to avoid providing negative feedback or bad news that might disrupt the carefully managed status quo. They don't want to jeopardize their consulted status.
And finally, the goal state, the structural, philosophical, and behavioral ideal. System 4, the participative system.
System 4 is characterized by complete, deep, and mutual trust between management and employees. Decisions are not merely consulted upon. Employees are fully included and participate in the actual decision-making process through group consensus mechanisms, often facilitated by the linking pin structure.
How does the motivation change when decisions are truly participatory?
Motivation shifts entirely. It is based on collective responsibility and rewards tied directly to achieving group goals. This creates immense peer pressure, the good kind, to succeed. Communication is entirely open, transparent, and completely free-flowing in all directions. Information hoarding is seen as antithetical to organizational success.
So Likert argues that System 4 is superior not just ethically but empirically in terms of productivity. Reiterate that productivity link for us.
It's rooted in the psychological commitment required for execution. System 4 is the most productive and durable because people naturally implement decisions better, with greater effort, and with more sustained commitment when they helped formulate those decisions themselves.
When you own the idea, you own the outcome.
You own the outcome. That's it.
That makes intuitive sense, but here's where the challenge of implementation arises. The internal consistency rule. Likert warned strongly against trying to cherry-pick elements from these systems.
This is a critical warning for any organizational reform. You cannot achieve System 4 results through System 2 methods. Likert stressed that the entire organization, its structure, its motivation system, its communication paths, and its punitive measures must align coherently.
Can you give us a concrete example of a mixed system failure? Because I see this all the time.
Oh, it's everywhere. Imagine a CEO who wants to foster innovation and entrepreneurial spirit, a core System 4 motivation. So they tell their employees, be creative, take risks.
Right.
But at the same time, the organizational structure remains System 1, highly hierarchical, all decisions centralized at the top, and failure is swiftly punished.
A recipe for disaster.
The employees will immediately recognize the dissonance. They are told to be autonomous, which is System 4, but are constrained by a rigid, fear-based structure, which is System 1. The result is paralysis. Employees won't risk creative failure if they know the punishment is severe. The attempt to mix systems leads to organizational confusion, distrust, and ultimately a reversion back to the comfort of the lower system.
So if you want high output, you have to accept the high autonomy and trust that must accompany it. You can't have one without the other.
You can't.
And this also reinforces the necessity for the gradual change we discussed earlier, link back to the time lag.
Absolutely. Emphasize that transition must be gradual and sustained. You cannot mandate a culture change overnight. Jumping from a repressive System 1 environment directly to a fully participative System 4 is structurally impossible. It requires sustained effort, 2 years of the time lag to change attitudes, build new supportive relationships, and train managers in the complex skills of peer-based decision-making.
Before we move on to his scientific methodology, we should acknowledge the real-world critique of System 4. If consensus is required for every decision, doesn't that inherently slow down the organization?
That is the primary, enduring counter-critique, particularly in sectors requiring rapid response, like military command or high-speed market trading.
Right.
Critics argue that while participative decision-making ensures commitment and high quality, it can be inherently too slow. If every stakeholder must be consulted and participate, quick decisions needed in a crisis or to capitalize on a fleeting competitive opportunity might be delayed, potentially proving fatal in the short term.
So it's the classic trade-off between speed and depth of commitment.
It is. Attention managers must always navigate.
That's a great point. Now, let's get to the true scientific breakthrough. How Likert proposed moving management from an art to a demonstrable science by measuring specific variables.
Likert believed that management theory would only gain respect and effectiveness when it adopted the rigorous measurement standards of the physical sciences. His framework provided a structured way to diagnose organizational health that went far beyond mere profit and loss statements. He introduced 3 distinct categories of variables that needed constant measurement.
Okay, let's start again with the inputs, the things management actively controls, the causal variables.
These are the independent variables, the levers management pulls to influence a system. They include formal organizational structure, like implementing the linking pin model, leadership style, like shifting from job-centered to employee-centered supervision, and formal policies, like compensation structure or hiring methods. Likert's central scientific hypothesis was that adopting a System 4 approach is the most powerful causal variable one can manipulate.
Okay, so management implements a new causal variable, let's say a major restructuring to decentralize decision-making. What's the next thing that should be measured?
That causal variable immediately acts upon the intervening variables. These describe the internal state, the psychological climate, or, the mood of the organization.
The mood.
The mood. They're intangible but measurable aspects like employee loyalty, trust in management, internal conflict levels, motivation scores, using perhaps the Likert scale itself, and the degree of cooperation across functional teams.
So if the causal variable is correct, say, moving towards System 4, the intervening variables should start to improve, but slowly. This is where the time lag manifests itself.
Precisely. You invest in the causal variable and you wait, tracking the intervening variables carefully. It takes time for loyalty to build or for suspicion to dissipate. It's the health of the emotional machinery.
And finally, those internal psychological states produce the tangible numbers that executives ultimately report, the end result variables.
These are the dependent variables, the final hard numbers that traditional accounting tracks. Production volume, profit margins, sales figures, scrap rates, absenteeism, and quality metrics. Likert's great contribution was proving that the path from causal to end result is predictable and measurable.
Summarize that full hypothesis chain for us once more, showing the predictable link across the variables.
The hypothesis is low trust, a System 1 causal variable, leads to high cynicism, low loyalty, and high internal conflict, which are negative intervening variables. And that ultimately leads to high turnover, low quality, and low profits, negative end results.
And the other way around.
Conversely, high support and participation, a System 4 causal variable, leads to high morale, high cooperation, and shared responsibility, which are positive intervening variables. And that reliably translates into sustained high production, low absenteeism, and robust profits, positive end results.
This framework changes the entire diagnostic process. If your end results are low, you stop blaming the market and start rigorously diagnosing the causal variables, like leadership style, and the intervening variables, like morale.
It forces management accountability for the internal climate, not just the external numbers. And this rigorous attention to internal health led Likert to his most radical and financially challenging proposal: human asset accounting.
He criticized traditional accounting for what he saw as a profound structural failure to recognize the true value of the human workforce. How did traditional accounting miss the boat?
Well, standard accounting focuses purely on tangibles and immediate monetary figures. It treats labor entirely as an expense, a cost to be minimized, just like electricity or raw materials.
Right.
Likert argued this creates a perverse incentive for managers to achieve short-term gains by destroying long-term human capital.
How does a manager destroy human capital under traditional accounting?
Simple. A manager, under pressure to cut costs, might eliminate training programs, drastically increase workloads, postpone necessary maintenance, or simply apply brutal, job-centered supervision. All these actions increase short-term output and decrease immediate expenses. The company looks financially great this quarter.
A hero manager again?
Exactly. However, these actions simultaneously deplete the human assets. Morale plummets, coordination skills degrade, and employee loyalty vanishes. The organization, in Likert's view, has just suffered a massive, unreported asset depreciation comparable to running a piece of machinery without maintenance.
The financial statement says profit up, but the organization is spiritually bankrupt. And what happens when a valuable employee leaves?
That's the core critique. If a highly trained, highly motivated manager with exceptional coordination skills leaves, the company suffers a major, measurable loss of assets, intellectual capital, team chemistry, operational knowledge. Yet under traditional accounting, the manager's salary expense stops, perhaps registering a small gain in the short term. The balance sheet completely fails to register the irreparable hit to the organization's long-term health.
That is truly profound. It means a company can be running a stealth crash cycle, reporting great financials right up until the point of collapse because the human debt wasn't being tracked.
This led him to propose the necessity for human resource accounting, or human asset accounting. This system would attempt the extremely difficult task of assigning a concrete monetary value to human intelligence, motivation, training, and coordination skills.
Wait, how exactly would one assign a monetary value to, say, a team's trust?
It's incredibly complex, which is why it hasn't been widely adopted. But the methodology would look at investments like recruitment costs, training costs, development time, and potential returns, like lower turnover, higher quality output, less supervision time required. The goal was to force managers to look at human capital not as an expense to be cut, but as an asset to be built, protected, and appreciated. If they depleted the human asset, the financial statement would show a measurable loss, making them accountable for maintaining a healthy system for climate.
I think the biggest challenge here is that this requires managers to completely change their incentives. You're no longer rewarded for short-term cost-cutting, you're rewarded for long-term human development.
Precisely. And it brings us back to the prescriptive advice Likert offered, the golden rule for organizational improvement. How do you actually get an organization to stop depleting its human assets and start building them?
He outlined a structured 5-step cycle for change.
Right. Step 1. Establish the ideal, which is the System 4 model. Step 2. Measure the organization's current standing using the 1-4 continuum where we're actually operating right now. Step 3. Diagnose specific weaknesses based on that measurement. Are we weak in communication? Weak in trust? Step 4. Prepare a detailed action plan focused on causal variables. And step 5. Implement the changes gradually.
And the most important guiding principle, the golden rule, comes during that implementation phase. What is that definitive rule for transition?
The rule is this. Management must focus its efforts exclusively on changing the causal variables, specifically leadership behavior and organizational structure. And crucially, they must not attempt to force the intervening variables directly.
You cannot give a corporate seminar called Be More Loyal.
It's futile. It just breeds cynicism. The theory guarantees that if the leadership is fixed, if the manager is trained and incentivized to adopt supportive, employee-centered behavior, then the desired intervening variables like motivation, loyalty, and cooperation will naturally follow suit.
You manage the input, and the internal health fixes itself over time.
That's the idea.
That rule provides such a clear directive for leaders. Stop focusing on the symptoms, like low morale, and start focusing on the cause, your own behavior, and the structure you created.
It's the ultimate lesson in systemic thinking. If you want a System 4 climate, you must install System 4 behavior and structure as the input, and then wait patiently for the time lag to run its course.
Let's transition now to how Likert handled the inevitable friction within any organization. Conflict resolution. Because even the healthiest, most supportive relationships will have disagreements.
That's right. Likert acknowledged that conflict is a natural outcome of human interaction, especially in a System 4 environment where honest communication is encouraged. But he differentiated between two types that require entirely different management.
First, there's substantive conflict.
This is the intellectual disagreement centered purely on the task or the work itself. It's debating the best strategic direction, the optimal product design, or the most efficient process. This type of conflict is healthy, productive, and essential for innovation, provided it's handled constructively.
Then there's the type of conflict that supportive relationships are designed to minimize. Effective conflict.
Effective conflict is emotional disagreement, rooted in personal relationships, personality clashes, or feelings of resentment and unfairness. It is destructive because it erodes the intervening variables, trust and cooperation, and consumes valuable organizational energy without contributing to the task.
And Likert's methodology for resolving these conflicts highlights the difference between his ideal system and the traditional authoritative one.
Well, in traditional authoritative organizations, your System 1 or 2, conflicts are typically handled using win-lose strategies. The manager, or the authority figure, imposes a solution. declaring one side the winner and the other the loser.
which creates immediate resentment, generates political enemies, and ensures the relationship is damaged.
Always. System 4 must be fundamentally different.
Right.
It is. System 4 promotes win-win strategies, often through participatory group problem-solving sessions. The goal is not just to solve the immediate task problem, but to resolve the conflict constructively while simultaneously preserving and strengthening the relationships involved. This requires more time, which connects back to the speed critique, but it pays massive dividends by maintaining those crucial intervening variables.
This whole body of work is a monumental achievement in organizational psychology. Let's synthesize Likert's historical importance and his specific legacy.
Likert truly represents the maturity of the human relations school. Before him, you had thinkers like Elton Mayo, who established that human factors mattered, but their advice often lacked the concrete tools needed for systematic implementation. It was often too generalized.
Likert moved from suggestion to science.
Precisely. His legacy is the provision of scientific tools. He gave managers the framework to classify supervisors as job-centered versus employee-centered, structurally fix the silo problem with the linking pin model, classify the health of their entire organization with the management system's 1 to 4 continuum.
And most importantly, provide a testable framework for change.
Exactly. The causal, intervening, and end result variables. He gave management the first sophisticated, quantifiable language for discussing and improving organizational culture.
This has been a deep dive into an essential figure whose work underpins so much of modern successful leadership. From his massive research budget to the structural elegance of the linking pin and the demanding ethical standard of System 4, Rensis Likert forced the world to recognize that the pursuit of human dignity and the pursuit of profit are not mutually exclusive.
They are, in fact, scientifically linked. And understanding this structure provides an invaluable diagnostic framework for you, the listener. You can walk into any meeting, any organization, and quickly assess where it falls on the 1 to 4 continuum and whether its leadership is running a durable growth cycle or, dangerously, a guaranteed crash cycle.
Absolutely. And that assessment often hinges on how the organization views its people. Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you to mull over.
We spent considerable time on Likert's radical concept of human asset accounting, the idea that managers and workers are assets whose intelligence, motivation, and coordination must be valued monetarily on a balance sheet. His original scientific research into human effectiveness cost $15 million decades ago.
So, we ask you to consider, what would it cost today to scientifically track, measure, and quantify the total human asset value of a massive, multinational, fluid organization like a modern tech firm where intellectual property is everything? And if we could perfectly quantify every individual employee's value, their specific contribution to the company's asset column, what ethical implications would such a monetary valuation raise for the individual employee in our modern gig economy, highly flexible labor market? Think about that tension between the scientific management of assets and the inherent value of humanity.